Well, good evening, and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. I'm going to get okay, she's calling me, so I'll answer the call, and then let's get this on the speaker so that we can hear her. Good evening.
Hello.
Yeah, I think we can hear you there. So,
Well, I lost you.
you did?
I had you on. Um,
Well, it doesn't show that
I
there's.
had, I had you up here, but you suddenly disappeared. In fact, I was listening to your piano and getting really irritated by it
Okay.
because I was the delay
You can hear it,
is
and then you can hear it in there, and yeah.
it's quite a bit of a delay, and
Right.
it's kind of irritating.
Yeah. Which is why you don't want to have the audio up now because then it'd
It's fine.
be a problem. Well, we're glad you could join us, and this is our Friday night Bible study for Friday, August 22nd, 2025. And it looks like we'll have one more Friday in August. That'll be the 29th. Let's see, 29th, 30th, 31st. So Monday will be the 1st of September. Okay. So that's got that part squared out. And we've had a relatively calm and quiet week here. Although I did get some stuff done Monday. I went out and did my usual shopping trip. And after I got the groceries put away and everything, then I got in the other car and took it downtown. And I took some paperwork in with me, and I got the registration on both our vehicles updated, and I updated my license. Now, you may be aware that in the United States they have invented something they call Real ID. And it's an item that you have to have if you're going to get a passport, travel overseas, enter a government building, all these things. They're now requiring this Real ID. And so I had thought I'd get it, but I didn't bring all the paperwork with me. So if I really need it and I have an extra $10, I can go dig up all that paperwork and take it in, and I can get a real ID. But nowadays, I don't have cause to be entering federal buildings, and I don't have any plans to travel overseas. So I have an idea. I don't really need it.
If
So
you don't have a real ID, does that mean you're not a real person?
yeah, well, I think this is related to the current administration's crackdown on immigration. So they want people to be able to. I, the government wants more control. I mean, it's that simple. This administration or the other administration, the government wants more control. This is a way to get it. So that's how people do. And then,
Just now, cats trying to figure out how you're in the phone.
oh, okay. I see. I'm only hearing about the last third of any sentence you say because it takes that long for the phone to decide you're talking and to turn you on.
I said the cat was having a little difficulty trying to figure out where you are because your voice is coming out of the phone.
Yeah. Poor kitty.
I
People
think
do.
she's sitting here watching you from the floor,
Yeah.
maybe in there with you now.
People do strange things that it's very difficult for animals to comprehend. Anyway, some time ago, I had a laptop that was given to me by a colleague at work. She was upgrading her computer, and she gave me her old one. So I took it home and fired it up, and I used it a little bit. Well, then the fan inside it died, so it couldn't work. Well, then my wife's nephew, who used to work in IT, had collected a stack of old laptops and Chromebooks, and he wanted to get rid of them, and he asked if I wanted them. So I took them home and I checked them all out, saw which ones would run, which ones wouldn't, looked at what was on their hard drives. He had been very careful to clean everything off, so the only thing on any of the hard drives was the operating system and essential files, but no other stuff. So I didn't find any of it particularly interesting other than the hardware itself. And so I had a lot of fun taking them apart. And one of them was an HP laptop that was very similar in design to the compact that this friend of mine had given me a few years earlier. So I wondered if I could swap out the fans. Well, the whole fan and heatsink thing were quite a bit different shapes. Every time they build the laptops, it's entirely proprietary, so there aren't really interchangeable parts. The way to connect the display and the way to connect these different things, they're all unique to that particular laptop. And even within the same manufacturer, different laptops that look similar may have different parts in them, different layouts on the motherboard, and a different arrangement for the heatsink and everything. And that was the case here. But inside the heatsink, the fan could be taken loose by 3 or 4 screws and lifted out. And that part was exactly the same between the two machines. So I took the heatsink fan assembly apart on both of them, swapped out the bad fan for the working fan, put it back in, put it back together, and it fired up and it worked. But in the process of that, I had messed a few things up. I didn't know how to take it apart. So I had taken it apart in the wrong sequence and had messed up some of the connections inside. Well, I got it back together and everything seemed to work except for the keyboard. And there were quite a number of keys in the keyboard that didn't work. And I thought, well, at some point I can take the keyboard back out, open the connection, reseat it, and that connection was actually not damaged in the work that I did. So I thought, sometime I'll do that and open it up and I'll get the keyboard working and it'll be a working laptop. I can have some fun with it. But I didn't get it done. So a couple, 3 weeks ago, I opened the thing up, decided to do that. Well, in the meantime, I had completely forgotten how to take it apart. So I did it wrong again and I bungered up some of the connections. Well, I was trying to get, there are connections in laptops where you fit a little ribbon cable in, and then there's a little plastic thing that folds down over the ribbon cable and kind of clamps it in place. And that had come loose. Well, I was trying to fit that little hinge bit back in, and in the process, my screwdriver slipped and I bent a pin. Well, I'd already had some bent pins on this thing. But it was pretty badly goobered up, and I decided I just left it sitting where it was, all taken apart, parts laying all over, screws here, there, and everywhere, and didn't do anything with it until I think it was Monday or Tuesday morning, something like that. And I decided I boogered it up too badly. I can't fix it, so I just go ahead and take it all apart and keep the pieces for use elsewhere if I need to at some point. So I got all that done, and I had the motherboard out of the thing and was looking at things, and all of a sudden the keyboard fell out of the upper cover of the laptop, and there was a bunch of holes in that cover where all the little places were supposed to connect. I'm like, well, okay. That's how I did it, and that's how it's easy. Now all of a sudden it's easy instead of well-nigh impossible to connect all these things. So I said, well, okay, I'll try it. So I had to get out a magnifying glass, and I went back to work on those bent pins, and That's tricky because metal does bend, but it doesn't bend forever. Every time you bend it, it weakens it. It's called metal fatigue. And eventually, instead of bending, it'll break. But so I didn't want to, you can't just bend it back and forth and back and forth, back and forth. You'll break it. And then you don't want to have anything. So I worked at it very carefully with the magnifying glass, and eventually I was able to fit the ribbon cable in. So then I used tape to hold that in place, put everything back together, and got the keyboard hooked up and fired it up and actually tested it, and yeah, all the keys on the keyboard work. I have 4 screws that I forgot to put in. I'm not sure where they came from. I don't know where they go. I'm not going to mess with it right now because it works. Of course, I don't use it that much, but it's just kind of a personal, what shall I say, kind of a plus for me to be able to pull something like that off and make it work. So,
we had the plumbers come out a few years back, and they had tools out all over my kitchen. We had a leak under the sink going to the dishwasher. And that's a difficult place to get to. So they had tools out all over the place. And when they were done and they were packing things up, they picked up this little piece of the thing off the counter, and the guy looked at it and he says, "I don't know what this is." And the other guy looked and says, "I don't know either." And I said, "I know what it is." They looked at me and like, "What is it?" And I said, "It's the paddle out of my bread machine."
Yeah, I remember when we had that out and working. It was a Teflon coated paddle, and you'd have to pull it out of the loaf after you got done making the bread.
Yeah.
Was there a point to that, or just?
It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
The look on their faces.
Well, then there was the time, and I'm going to sound like I'm bragging here. We were getting our heating and cooling system replaced. And they got to a point, and I was at work at the time, they got to a point and they were having trouble fitting the whole thing in. And I don't know how it happened, but they ended up calling me about it, and
he couldn't get the thing up in there. He was going to have to remove part of the wall.
Okay.
He said, "Get something on the phone." So I called you.
Yeah. And I listened to what he was describing. I said, "Well, try this." Poor guy felt a little bit chagrined after that because that was the obvious solution and it worked.
Oh, he was embarrassed.
I don't remember what it was I suggested. There's something about you can take this loose and do this, and then it'll all fit together for you. You won't have to take the wall out.
It was too tall to fit in there where it needed to go. All he had to do was reach over to the right and hold it in above the washing machine. There's plenty of room. Lift it up and then move it left.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
He was so embarrassed.
Poor guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that can happen to anybody. And it doesn't say I'm any smarter than him. It's just I had a different perspective at the moment. It was easy for me to see how to deal with it. Had he been at a different angle and a different mode at the time, he probably could have thought of it too. It's embarrassing, but it's not like he didn't know what he was doing. He knew what he was doing.
He's the only one that they were sending out here for a while because you were pulling things apart and leaving them dismantled and telling me, "Tell him just to do this, put it back together," like I would know what you were talking about. So they said he was their best technician and he could put it back together no matter what you did to it. Don't worry about it. So he was the only one out here for a while.
Now that was on the old furnace. I haven't messed with this new one. It hasn't needed help. The old one, we had to replace some parts on it. And in fact, the company that we used to put in a new one, we called on because when the old furnace died on us earlier, the local company had said the only thing we can do is sell you a new one. And I called them and they said, oh, well, we can get you this part and you can put it in. And they sent us the part and I put it in and it worked for 2 or 3 more years. So I'm like, yeah, I like that company better. So they're the ones we used.
They're a reputable company.
Hmm?
They are a reputable company.
Yeah, they're a big and reputable company. And when my folks moved down here to be with us, they wanted to put in central heat and air in their house. And I recommended that company and they came and put it in for them. So, and we have run on for too long here. We really need to kind of get started. We're in 2 Chronicles, and unless I don't remember what we did last week well enough, I think we're ready for chapter 25. So let's bow our heads and then we'll begin. My Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings, and we thank you for the joys and victories of the week that's passed, and even for the trials and difficulties, because sometimes we know that while they're hard on us, if we use them correctly, they can help us grow closer to you. We want those things, and we want what we do now to bring us closer to you, to give us a clearer view of the glory and loveliness of your character. We ask that the Holy Spirit will come to each person and give them the blessing and the understanding that they need. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, 2 Chronicles chapter 25, Amaziah rules in Judah. Now, Amaziah's father was his father Jotham? Joash, excuse me. I think his father was Joash. At any rate, here's how it reads. Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. 25 and 29, that's only 54. His mother was Jehoaddan from Jerusalem. Footnote for that, as in the parallel text at 2 Kings 14:2, the Hebrew reads Jehoaddan, variant spelling of Jehoaddin. Spelling, yeah. And in fact, when you're rendering from one language to another, there are differences in the ways that different interpreters will render the original language word in English. And we have, over the last 20 or 30 years, attempted to get a little bit better at that in naming cities in foreign countries. So we used to call China's capital Peking. Now we call it Beijing. The name hasn't changed. It's just how we render it in our language that has changed. Same thing with the capital of India. We used to call it Bombay. Now we call it Mumbai. Just a different transliteration of the original language into our language of English. So I think there are differences in the Hebrew being used here, reflected in replacing the I with an A there, as they're saying. The Hebrew says A, we render it as I. But I don't think it's any doubt as to who it was. We don't really have any other reference to this person in the scriptures, so no big deal really. Amaziah did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, but not wholeheartedly. When Amaziah was well established as king, he executed the officials who had assassinated his father. However, he did not kill the children of the assassins, for he obeyed the command of the Lord as written by Moses in the book of the law. Parents must not be put to death for the sins of their children, nor children for the sins of their parents. Those deserving to die must be put to death for their own crimes. Footnote B, and probably tell us where that comes from, although I did look it up anyway. Yes, Deuteronomy 24, verse 16. And it says, well, it's essentially a direct quote. That principle got repeated in the book of Ezekiel. We'll have more to say about that when we get to that chapter in Ezekiel. I think it's chapter 16, where God talks about the parable that the people of Judah were using in the days that they were under siege from the Babylonians. And they were saying, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And so God has the prophet write this little speech, this essay, shall we say, part of it given poetically, to emphasize that, no, I'm not like that. I don't do that. If someone dies, it's for his own sin. And the way it's worded in the King James is, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. And when Martin Luther came up with the doctrine of penal substitution, that became one of the key proof texts to prove that God had decreed that anybody who sinned should die. And then the doctrine of penal substitution is that you deserve to die, God would kill you, but Jesus, his son, stepped in and died in your place, so now God doesn't have to kill you. The problem is what that says about God, not what it says about substitution, because we do believe that Jesus' death did, in a sense, substitute for the death that we should have died, but we hold that the death due to sin is entirely natural consequences for what we do. When you sin, you separate yourself from the source of life. When you separate yourself from the source of life, like when you pick a flower, what does it do? It dies. Why? Because it no longer has a connection to the source of life. And so with us, if we pluck ourselves away from God, he is the literal source of physical life, then death is the inevitable and inescapable result. And thus, it is very clear, cause and effect. The soul that sins, the soul that separates itself from God, from the source of life, that soul will die. The soul that does not, whatever individual it is, father, son, grandson, whatever the relationship is, if they remain connected to me, they have life. Which is why Jesus would say when he was here that the people needed to come to him to find eternal life, because he could reconnect them with the Creator, with the source of life, and they could then have eternal life. John makes that very clear as we read through what he had to say. Okay, so we finished that. That's at the end of verse 4 there. Then Amaziah organized the army, assigning generals and captains for all Judah and Benjamin. He took a census and found that he had an army of 300,000 select troops, 20 years and older, all trained in the use of spear and shield. He also paid about 7,500 pounds of silver to hire 100,000 experienced fighting men from Israel. Now, here's another snippet of the story that we don't get in the books of the Kings, because the books of Kings, largely overseen by the prophets, were recounting the stories of both kings didn't have as much room to put stories of Judea's kings in. So now we read in verse 7, "But a man of God came to him," that is Amaziah, "and said, Your Majesty, do not hire troops from Israel, for the Lord is not with Israel. He will not help those people of Ephraim. If you let them go with your troops into battle, you will be defeated by the enemy no matter how well you fight. God will overthrow you, for he has the power to help you or to trip you up." Now, to a certain extent, we're seeing a reference here to the prophet's cultural view of God and not to the reality of God. God is not to trip us up or to trap us or to single us out for destruction. That's not who he is. He's the creator, not the destroyer. But there is an individual out there who is out to trip us up. And if we depart from the creator, the door might be open for that individual to come in and do what it is his nature to do, which is to murder, because he is a liar and a murderer. Amaziah asked the man of God, "But what about all that silver I paid to hire the army of Israel?" The man of God replied, "The Lord is able to give you much more than this." So Amaziah discharged the hired troops and sent them back to Ephraim. This made them very angry with Judah, and they returned home in a great rage. Yeah, I can see that. They probably heard what this man of God had to say, and so they understood why they were being sent home. And they may have believed that this was an opportunity to improve the bonds between the northern and southern kingdoms. And now all of a sudden this prophet comes out and says, don't let them fight with you. They're not with Yahweh. Well, they thought they were. So that's going to cross over their pride and their inflated self-image. And so they're very angry, and they return home in a great rage. Then Amaziah summoned his courage and led his army to the valley of Salt, where they killed 10,000 Edomite troops from Seir. They captured another 10,000 and took them to a top of a cliff and threw them off, dashing them to pieces on the rocks below. Yeah, real brotherly kindness here. Recall that Edomites are the descendants of Esau, who was brother to Jacob, also known as Israel. So now we have the children of Israel fighting the children of Esau, so essentially brother nations, and this is how they treat each other. Well, when you succumb to your human tendencies and you get disconnected from somebody that you had a close relationship before, human nature is that that's going to be exceptionally bitter. Check out the court cases where a husband and wife is separated, and now they're using the children as weapons against each other, trying to spite each other because they can't stand each other's, and men and women both will do this. And the poor kids are stuck in the middle, and well, no wonder they grow up messed up. But anyway. Meanwhile, verse 13, the hired troops that Amaziah had sent home raided several towns of Judah between Samaria and Beth-horon. They killed 3,000 people and carried off great quantities of plunder. Now again, this is a story that we didn't read in the books of Kings. When King Amaziah returned from slaughtering the Edomites, he brought with him idols taken from the people of Seir. he set them up as his own gods, bowed down in front of them, and offered sacrifices to them. This made the Lord very angry, and he sent a prophet to ask, "Why do you turn to gods who could not even save their own people from you?" But the king interrupted him and said, "Since when have I made you the king's counselor? Be quiet now before I have you killed." In other words, here's a prophet speaking truth to power, and power wasn't very pleased about it. So the prophet stopped with this warning: "I know that God is determined to destroy you because you have done this and have refused to accept my counsel." Now again, the prophet here has slipped into the cultural ideology of the time. If you got destroyed, well, if it happened, God did it. So if you end up being destroyed, then God did it. He didn't say, now that you separated yourself from God, God may not be there to protect you when somebody comes around to destroy you.
What is this that God hath done unto me?
Where'd that come from?
The Bible.
Okay, do you remember the context of it? It sounds familiar, but I can't place it right away.
Oh, I'm sure it's in several different places. I would start looking at maybe Jacob when Joseph disappeared.
I'll tell you what, let me open another Bible gateway here.
Maybe from a movie.
See if I can find it that way. Let me try a different wording. Okay, it came up with 6 results. I put in a search, what has God done to me? And I come up with 1 Chronicles 21:17. And David said to God, "I am the one who called for the census. I am the one who has sinned and done wrong. But these people are as innocent as sheep. What have they done?" Psalm 40 verse 3. Psalm 75:9. Jeremiah 3:6. Have you seen what fickle Israel has done? All right. And then it comes up with Romans 15:18. Yet I dare not boast about anything except what Christ has done through me, bringing the Gentiles to God by my message, and by the way I worked among them.
Well, it may be a line out of a movie that was based on the Bible, a Bible story.
Could be.
An Ellen thing.
Mm-hmm. Continuing on. Verse 17. After consulting with his advisors, King Amaziah of Judah sent this challenge to Israel's king Jehoash. And that footnote tells us that the Hebrew's actually Joash, but it's a variant spelling of Jehoash. A number of kings in Israel and Judah had similar names at the same time. In fact, there was a king Amaziah, I think, before Jehoash in Israel. Anyway, the son of Jehoahaz and grandson of Jehu. Come and meet me in battle. But King Jehoash of Israel replied to King Amaziah of Judah with this story. Out in the Lebanon mountains, a thistle sent a message to a mighty cedar tree. Give your daughter in marriage to my son. But just then a wild animal of Lebanon came by and stepped on the thistle, crushing it. You are saying, I have defeated Edom and you are very proud of it. But my advice is to stay at home. Why stir up trouble that will only bring disaster on you and the people of Judah? Now, what's going on here? Why is Amaziah picking this fight? Well, it may have been because of what the soldiers of Israel did on their way home after they'd been sent home at the word of the prophet. But Amaziah refused to listen, for God was determined to destroy him for turning to the gods of Edom. And again, even in the post-exilic period when this book was prepared, there was still an element in their culture of, if it happened, God did it. Therefore, if Amaziah ends up being destroyed, well, God did it. Well, why would God do it? Well, God would do it because he turned to the gods of Edom. So King Jehoash of Israel mobilized his army against King Amaziah of Judah. The two armies drew up their battle lines at Beth-Shemesh in Judah. Judah was routed by the army of Israel, and its army scattered and fled for home. King Jehoash of Israel captured Judah's king, Amaziah, son of Joash, and grandson of Ahaziah, at Beth-Shemesh. Ahaziah is the one who was a king in Israel, I believe. He was the son of Ahab, whose soldiers were killed in that incident when the soldiers were sent to capture Elijah, and Elijah called down fire from heaven to destroy them. We covered that in a sermon presentation a few years back. That would have been this, I think that was a king named Ahaziah. Anyway, King Jehoash of Israel captured Judah's king, Amaziah, son of Joash, and grandson of Ahaziah, at Beth-Shemesh. Then he brought him to Jerusalem, where he demolished 600 feet of Jerusalem's wall from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate. He carried off all the gold and silver and all the articles from the temple of God that had been in the care of Obed-Edom. He also seized the treasures of the royal palace along with hostages and then returned to Samaria. Now that Obed-Edom is a familiar name. You may recall that when David first tried to bring the ark to Jerusalem, they brought it on an ox cart, and somebody died at the point in time that he touched the ark. And it made David afraid, and he left it there where it was at the house of one Obed-Edom. Well, then the household of Obed-Edom got blessed, and so eventually David said, well, let's find out how I'm supposed to do this, and let's get the ark brought to Jerusalem, so on and so forth. That's the old story. So that makes me wonder, is Obed-Edom a name or a title? And I'm going to do something here. I do this once in a while because I found you can. Obed-Edom, a name or a title. And Obed-Edom was a proper biblical name, not a title, given to at least two different individuals, with the most prominent being the Gittite, whose house became a temporary home for the Ark of the Covenant. His name is thought to mean servant of Edom, or servant of the Red One, reflecting a common practice of naming in ancient Israel. And we could look on there, but read more about it. All right, so they're saying it's not a title, it is a name. And if that's the case, well, I'm going to look this up real quick, just see what it says. Obed-Edom in Samuel, Obed-Edom in 1 Chronicles. Obed-Edom in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 25 relates events it claims occurred during the reign of King Jehoash of Israel and Amaziah of Judah. They reigned at the same time, around approximately 800 to 775 before the Common Era. This is at least 1 or 2 centuries after the period when David would have reigned, somewhere in the range of 1050 to about 925 BCE. The chapter relates that Jehoash attacked Amaziah, then came to Jerusalem, and he took all the gold and silver and all the vessels that were found in the house of God with Obed-Edom and the treasuries of the king's house, the hostages also, and returned to Samaria. Now, several scholars have noted the existence of uncertainties and disagreements about the Obed-Edom passages. However, most scholars agree that in the name Obed-Edom the Gittite, as he's called in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, the term Gittite refers originally to a Philistine and therefore a non-Israelite man. However, in Chronicles, Obed-Edom is assigned a Levitical pedigree, that is described as a Levite, an Israelite member of the tribe entrusted with holy responsibilities. Well, I would question that, but let's go ahead and read this through. This description as a Levite is usually regarded as a chronicler's own interpretation. As a result of these differing interpretations, several scholars have proposed that the chronicler has altered the original description of a Philistine Obed-Edom in order to make the character a Levite. Conservative scholars point out that Gittite refers simply to the town of Gath and not to the nationality of the individual. David had recently been given sanctuary in Gath by Achish, king of Gath, and it would be erroneous to conclude that David was somehow therefore a Philistine. Moreover, Gath was one of the originally deeded Levitical cities given to Kohathites, from whose family Obed-Edom was descended. Therefore, his residence in this contested city is not surprising. So, there's one explanation. But let's go back to 2 Chronicles 25 and read what it says again. He carried off all the gold and silver and all the articles from the temple of God that had been in the care of Obed-Edom. Well, recall that Obed-Edom ended up with his stuff in the time of David when Uzziah, I think was his name, was killed when he touched the ark. So, it may just be saying that at that time all these things were left in his care until David later brought them to Jerusalem. So it's not necessarily naming Obed-Edom in this case as contemporary with Amaziah, but rather these are articles that had been in his care at some point in time. So to me, it doesn't mean that he was necessarily a Levite in charge of these things. He may have been an Israelite, as they explain. I don't think that's a big to do one way or the other. That's just how they chose to relate it here. And it doesn't specifically say he was a Levite. It just says that these things had been in his care. He also seized the treasures of the royal palace along with hostages and then returned to Samaria. And again, this is a story that we did not read in the books of Kings. So, okay, this isn't the part that I was thinking of. That's still to come. I do sometimes read ahead a little bit, and then I get confused about which order things come in and what happened to. King Amaziah of Judah lived for 15 years after the death of King Jehoash of Israel. The rest of the events in Amaziah's reign from beginning to end are recorded in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. After Amaziah turned away from the Lord, there was a conspiracy against his life in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But his enemies sent assassins after him, and they killed him there. They brought his body back on a horse, and he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. As in some Hebrew manuscripts and other ancient versions, most Hebrew manuscripts read the city of Judah. Well, all right. But it's probably still the same city, whether you call it the city of Judah or the city of David. 2 Chronicles 26. All the people of Judah had crowned Amaziah's 16-year-old son, Uzziah, as king in place of his father. After his father's death, Uzziah rebuilt the town of Elath and restored it to Judah. Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 52 years. That makes his reign the second longest of all of them. And in fact, if you compare it, the longest reign was Manasseh, the son of Hezekiah, who reigned for 55 years. But Manasseh started reigning, a co-regency with his father, scholars believe, when he was 12 years old. So you take those 4 years, since Uzziah was 16 when he became king, and you add those 4 years to Uzziah. If Uzziah had become king when he was 12 instead of 16, it would have been 52 years, it would have been 56 years. But, okay, second longest, 52 years, Manasseh the longest, 55 years. Few kings exceeded 40 years. That was the length of reign of Saul, David, and Solomon. And then after that, the numbers started varying all over the place. His mother was Jechaliah from Jerusalem. He did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, just as his father Amaziah had done. Uzziah sought God during the days of Zechariah, who taught him to fear God. Footnote B, as in the Syriac and Greek versions, the Hebrew reads, who instructed him in divine visions. All right. As long as the king sought guidance from the Lord, God gave him success. Uzziah declared war on the Philistines and broke down the walls of Gath, Jabneh, and Ashdod. And then he built new towns in the Ashdod area and in other parts of Philistia. God helped him in his wars against the Philistines, his battle with the Arabs of Gur, and his war with the Meunites. The Meunites paid annual tribute to him, and his fame spread even to Egypt, for he had become very powerful. Now, the footnote about the Meunites says that the Hebrew actually reads the Ammonites. And let's see what it says about the Arabs of Gur there, footnote C. As in the Greek version, Hebrew reads Gur Baal. And again with the Meunites, as in the Greek version, the Hebrew reads Ammonites, and compare 26 verse 7. Uzziah built fortified towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate, at the valley gate, and at the angle in the wall. He also constructed forts in the wilderness and dug many water cisterns, because he kept great herds of livestock in the foothills of Judah and on the plains. That reminds me of something. When you keep livestock, one of the things you have to do is you have to provide them with water. We have livestock in our house in the form of a kitty cat, Felis domesticus, a rather robust one in terms of overall weight. And we think that's because she was found feral as a kitten, was abandoned, and probably spent a certain portion of her life exceptionally hungry. And so that's given her a rather unhealthy relationship with food, so she's a little bit punky. It's a lot of fun when she jumps on you from the floor up to your lap. Yeah, she's heavy. Anyway, we do have to provide her with water, and I try to keep her water fresh and clean. If I see it's getting too dirty, I'll change it out for her. When you're dealing with larger livestock, that becomes a bigger issue, because the larger livestock can drink a lot. When I worked for a dairy farmer in the UP of Michigan, he had a cow that he was using commercial semen to impregnate his cattle. So you would buy it, it would come frozen, and you would use various instruments to put this stuff inside the cow. And so this commercial stock will produce very robust calves. They pick only the best bulls to produce this semen that they sell commercially. So he was having a problem because now his cows were delivering calves with large heads. so large that they would get stuck in the birth canal, and the farmer would have a tough time delivering the calf. And in fact, in one instance, he had a cow that was about to deliver, was having trouble delivering, and he called the vet in, and I was there, and I scrubbed in and helped the vet, and they cut a hole in the side of the cow and pulled the calf out, and the cow was sewed up and was walking around, no big problem, and the calf was a very healthy calf. But in this one instance, he had tried to do it himself and had Jackson all this stuff trying to help get the calf out of this cow. And in the process, he damaged the nerve that goes over the back at the hips. And it left the cow unable to walk. I think she eventually did get to where she could walk, but for a time she was unable to walk. She was just laying there out in the barnyard and couldn't move. So we had to bring her water. And so we would put water in a 5-gallon bucket and bring it to her. And she could suck down an entire 5-gallon bucket all at once. You'd have to go get more for her. So yeah, livestock has a big need for water. Just when it was talking about him digging many water cisterns because he had great herds of livestock, yeah, you've got to provide plenty of water for your livestock. He also was a man who loved the soil. He had many workers who cared for his farms and vineyards, both on the hillsides and in the fertile valleys. Well, vineyards do well on hillsides because you aren't going to use machinery to harvest the grapes, so it doesn't have to be flat like it would have to be for like if you grow grain, you want to cut it with a combine. The land has to be flat enough. You're not going to run the combine on the side hill very well. I mean, you can have some hills and rises and falls in the field, but it does have to be kind of limited. Anyway, Uzziah had an army of well-trained warriors ready to march into battle, unit by unit. This army had been mustered and organized by Jael, the secretary of the army, and his assistant Maaseiah. They were under the direction of Hananiah, one of the king's officials. These regiments of mighty warriors were commanded by 2,600 clan leaders. The army consisted of 307,500 men, all elite troops. They were prepared to assist the king against any enemy. Uzziah provided the entire army with spears, shields, helmets, coats of mail, bows, and slingstones. And he built structures on the walls of Jerusalem, designed by experts to protect those who shot arrows and hurled large stones from the towers and the corners of the wall. It's probably the parapet kind of thing where you have high sections of the wall and low sections of the wall. So you have a low section where you can jump over and shoot at the enemy who's besieging the castle. And when it gets too hot, you can jump over behind the high part and be protected from what they try to do to you. And that's why castles have those ridges, high and low, along the sides. His fame spread far and wide, for the Lord gave him marvelous help, and he became very powerful. Footnote F there, by the way, or to shoot arrows and hurl large stones. Okay, just different wording, says the same thing. Whoop-de-doo. But when he had become powerful, he also became proud, which led to his downfall. Is it in the Proverbs, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall? And this was written by probably Solomon, if it's in Proverbs. I mean, not everything in Proverbs was written by Solomon, but most of it was. So this was a knowledge that would have been available to Uzziah. He probably had forgotten it, He sinned against the Lord his God by entering the sanctuary of the Lord's temple and personally burning incense on the incense altar. Azariah, the high priest, went in after him with 80 other priests of the Lord, all brave men. They confronted King Uzziah and said, "It is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord. That is the work of the priests alone, the descendants of Aaron, who are set apart for this work. Get out of the sanctuary, for you have sinned. The Lord will not honor you for this." Uzziah, who was holding an incense burner, became furious. But as he was standing there raging at the priests before the incense altar in the Lord's temple, leprosy suddenly broke out on his forehead. Now, the footnote there will tell you what all modern translations tell us about the word leprosy, and that is that it was used at the time for any number of infectious skin diseases and not necessarily the disease that we in the modern age call leprosy. But still, whatever it was, these infectious skin diseases did bring on the king all the restrictions in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, I think mostly in Leviticus, about these infectious skin diseases and about their cleansing and so forth. When Azariah the high priest and all the other priests saw the leprosy, they rushed him out. And the king himself was eager to get out because the Lord had struck him. Well, that's what they thought, so that's what they said. Yeah, he came down with leprosy. It may have been a natural occurrence, although coming at this time, it may reflect a reduced divine protection, that he was already susceptible to this, and when he so blatantly and arrogantly separated himself from the creator and source of life, this became a problem. So King Uzziah had leprosy until the day he died. He lived in isolation in a separate house, for he was excluded from the temple of the Lord. His son Jotham was put in charge of the royal palace, and he governed the people of the land. Now here's a case where a dual regency is very explicitly stated. King Uzziah was still king, he hadn't died yet, but he was unable to contact people. He had to be excluded and live in isolation, and so his son dealt with the people and would have counted the beginning of his reign from the point in time when he was in charge of the royal palace and governed the people of the land. The rest of the events of Uzziah's reign, from beginning to end, are recorded by the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz. When Uzziah died, he was buried with his ancestors. His grave was in a nearby burial field belonging to the kings, for the people said he had leprosy. And his son Jotham became the next king. So even in death, they separated him in burial because of his disease, his infectious skin disease. Now, you notice it says there in verse 23, when Uzziah died. You will find in the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, he leads that chapter out by saying, in the year that King Uzziah died. Let me look that up real quick. Yes, Isaiah 6, verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. So that's where we are. Isaiah is receiving his formal call in vision at this time in Judah's history, and Jotham will be the first king under whom Isaiah serves. So we'll read on now, we'll find out. Jotham was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. His mother was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok. Now, 25 plus 16, 35, 41. Not very old. I would say that was a premature death. Anyway, as we read, it says, Jotham did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight. He did everything his father Uzziah had done, except that Jotham did not sin by entering the temple of the Lord. But the people continued in their corrupt ways. Jotham rebuilt the upper gate of the temple of the Lord. He also did extensive rebuilding on the wall of the hill of Ophel. He may have been rebuilding what the Israelites had torn down during the reign of his grandfather. He built towns in the hill country of Judah and constructed fortresses and towers in the wooded areas. Jotham went to war against the Ammonites and conquered them. Over the next 3 years, he received from them an annual tribute of 7,500 pounds of silver, 50,000 bushels of wheat, and 50,000 bushels of barley. And footnotes A and B will be the conversions from the biblical units that were used. King Jotham became powerful because he was careful to live in obedience to the Lord his God. The rest of the events of Jotham's reign, including all his wars and other activities, are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. When Jotham died, he was buried in the city of David, and his son Ahaz became the next king. Now, we're going to do a little interesting bit of math here. I do this from time to time. How old was Daddy when his son was born? Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king. Well, this one isn't so bad because we know that his father, Jotham, died at 41. So if Ahaz was 20 when he became king, he was born when his dad was 21. We've got some that were born when their dad was quite a bit younger. But anyway, moving on. He reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Whoa, that's short. 20 and 16 is only 36. He did not do what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel. He cast metal images for the worship of Baal. He offered sacrifice in the valley of Ben Hinnom, even sacrificing his own sons in the fire. The footnote will tell us that the Hebrew reads, causing his sons to pass through the fire. In this way, he followed the detestable practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the pagan shrines and on the hills and under every green tree. And that's a reference to worship practices that we will read about later in the prophets. Because of all this, the Lord his God allowed the king of Aram, that is what we today call Syria, to defeat Ahaz and to exile large numbers of his people to Damascus. The armies of the king of Israel also defeated Ahaz and inflicted many casualties on his army. In a single day, Pekah, son of Remaliah, Israel's king, killed 120,000 of Judah's troops, all of them experienced warriors, because they had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors. Then Zikri, a warrior from Ephraim, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, Azariah, the king's palace commander, and Elkanah, the king's second in command. The armies of Israel captured 200,000 women and children from Judah and seized tremendous amounts of plunder, which they took back to Samaria. In other words, the people of Israel are acting like all the nations around them. You go, you engage in battle, you capture people, you make them your slave, you take them back, you take all their wealth, your wealth, and it's now called plunder. And so this shouldn't surprise us. When you adopt the practices of the world around you, you end up acting like the world around you and doing all the depraved and detestable things that they do. You know, you link yourself to it. You can't help it. I mean, these things are just kind of natural results. Now, Pekah, son of Remaliah, I'm going to go back to Isaiah again because that name gets mentioned in Isaiah. And that also mentions Ahaz. as the king in Isaiah chapter 7. When Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Well, here it says they did, but you're going to read why this account might say they could not overpower it. So Isaiah gets sent to encourage Ahaz. And that's it. It brings on the well, it's where we find the reference to Emmanuel, because Isaiah told Ahaz to ask for a sign. Ahaz, a wicked king, said, "Oh, I'm not going to tempt the Lord. I'm not going to test God." And the prophet didn't take that too kindly. But then he says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin or the young woman will be with child, will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel." Now, we often read that as a messianic prophecy, and that's not without good cause. But very specifically, this passage refers to the prophet's own son, Shear-Jashub. And it says he will eat curds and honey when he knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right. But before the boy knows enough to reject the wrong and choose the right, the land of the two kings you dread will be laid waste. And that is Rezin and Pekah, son of Remaliah. And I think they're mentioned again well, let's see, I'm looking through chapter 8 here, is it in chapter 9? Now, there's a place where it says, who are these guys? Well, they're just these guys. Yeah. Anyway, so let's read on and see what happened and see why the authors of the books of Kings would say that they didn't prevail, whereas this says it did. But a prophet of the Lord named Oded was there in Samaria when the army of Israel returned home. He went out to meet them and said, "Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, was angry with Judah and let you defeat them." Well, that's an interesting take on it, a little bit different from it. God didn't order it, he just let it happen. "But you have gone too far, killing them without mercy, and all heaven is disturbed. And now you are planning to make slaves of these people from Judah and Jerusalem? What about your own sins against the Lord your God? Listen to me and return these prisoners you have taken, for they are your own relatives. Watch out, because now the Lord's fierce anger has been turned against you." Then some of the leaders of Israel, Azariah son of Jehohanan, Berechiah son of Meshillemoth, Hezekiah son of Shallum, and Amasa son of Hadlai, agreed with this and confronted the men returning from battle. "You must not bring the prisoners here," they declared. "We cannot afford to add to our sins and guilt. Our guilt is already great, and Yahweh's fierce anger is already turned against Israel." Well, yes, God gets angry, but he gets angry at sin. He's angry at what the people are doing that's separating them from him, because he knows these things destroy them. But, these prophets don't yet have that understanding, so they will say that the anger is against Israel. So the warriors released the prisoners and handed over the plunder in the sight of the leaders and all the people. Then the four men, just mentioned by name, came forward and distributed clothes from the plunder to the prisoners who were naked. They provided clothing and sandals to wear, gave them enough food and drink, and dressed their wounds with olive oil. They put those who were weak on donkeys and took all the prisoners back to their own people in Jericho, the city of palms. Then they returned to Samaria. Again, this is a story that we didn't read there. Even in the book of Kings, when it talks about Pekah, son of Remaliah, as the king of Israel, it doesn't tell this story about what happened. And it doesn't actually mention Pekah here, except that he was the king at the time that it happened and probably ordered the assault. And he may have been upset at these four men who deprived him of all his slave labor by sending the people back to Judah. At that time, King Ahaz of Judah asked the king of Assyria for help. The armies of Edom had again invaded Judah and taken captives, and the Philistines had raided towns located in the foothills of Judah and in the Negev of Judah. They had already captured and occupied Beth Shemesh, Aijalon, Gederoth, Socoh with its villages, Timnah with its villages, and Gimzo with its villages. The Lord was humbling Judah because of King Ahaz of Judah. Well, that's the explanation they give, and there may be some truth to it if they have driven God away and no longer have his protection. For he had encouraged his people to sin and had been utterly unfaithful to Yahweh. So when King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria arrived, he attacked Ahaz instead of helping him. Ahaz took valuable items from the Lord's temple, the royal palace, and from the homes of his officials, and gave them to the king of Assyria as tribute. But this did not help him. Even during this time of trouble, King Ahaz continued to reject the Lord. Now, when we read this story in Kings, it says about how he went to Damascus to meet with Tiglath-Pileser, and there he saw an altar and sent plans, I think this is the one, back to Israel to have it built and put in the temple. Doesn't say that here. Even during this time of trouble, King Ahaz continued to reject Yahweh. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus who had defeated him, for he said, "Since these gods helped the king of Aram, they will help me too if I sacrifice to them." Well, we see here how he has a very transactional view of the relationship between divinity and humanity. If you want something good from the divine powers, give them gifts, give them sacrifices, do what they require, and maybe you'll get their favor and they'll do good things for you. Highly transactional. It is not relationship based. It is not, there's no, can I know you better? It's all, what can you do for me? So he wanted these gods to help him like they helped the kings of Aram if he sacrificed to them. But then the authors here say, but instead they led to his ruin and the ruin of all Judah. The king took the various articles from the temple of God and broke them into pieces. He shut the doors to the Lord's temple so that no one could worship there, and he set up altars to pagan gods in every corner of Jerusalem. He made pagan shrines in all the towns of Judah for offering sacrifices to other gods. In this way, he aroused the anger of the Lord, the God of his ancestors. Again, God's angry at their actions because he knows that their actions separate them from him and ultimately destroy them. The rest of the events of Ahaz's reign and everything he did from beginning to end are recorded in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. When Ahaz died, he was buried in Jerusalem, but not in the royal cemetery of the kings of Judah. So the people are making a judgment call here. He's not worthy of being buried with these other kings. He was wicked, so we're not going to bury him with the others. Then his son Hezekiah became the next king. Now, we're going to read a lot about Hezekiah. Now, in the books of Kings and also in Isaiah, there are like 3 chapters that deal with Sennacherib and Hezekiah, and then with Hezekiah's illness. Here, if we get there, I don't think we will. It's all in one chapter, but there's a whole lot else about Hezekiah's reign. Now, part of the reason that they would put more to it is that a little more time has passed. They've got more data available to them to flesh out the account of Hezekiah, but there may also have been some agenda things going on here. The chroniclers would have had an agenda, and part of that, as we've suggested in previous evenings, would have been to make Judah look good compared to Israel. So they're going to really pump up Hezekiah and his reign, because Hezekiah was a good king of Judah. Hezekiah was 25 years old when he became the king of Judah, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. 25 and 29 gets us to 54. All right? Very similar to a previous one, as I recall. His mother was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah. He did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, just as his ancestor David had done. Now again, when we talk about them hyping Hezekiah, we're not going to suggest that what they say about Hezekiah didn't happen. We're just commenting on the emphasis that they put on the events of Hezekiah's reign as compared with the earlier accounts that we've read in the books of Kings. In the very first month of the first year of his reign, Hezekiah reopened the doors of the temple of the Lord and repaired them. Recall that his father Ahaz had closed them and wouldn't let people go in. He summoned the priests and Levites to meet him at the courtyard east of the temple. He said to them, "Listen to me, you Levites. Purify yourselves and purify the temple of the Lord, the God of our ancestors, your ancestors. Remove all the defiled things from the sanctuary. Our ancestors were unfaithful and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord our God. They abandoned the Lord and his dwelling place. They turned their backs on him. They also shut the doors to the temple's entry room, and they snuffed out the lamps. They stopped burning incense and presenting burnt offerings at the sanctuary of the God of Israel. This is why the Lord's anger has fallen upon Judah and Jerusalem. He has made them an object of dread, horror, and ridicule, as you can see with your own eyes. Because of this, our fathers have been killed in battle, and our sons and daughters and wives have been captured. But now I will make a covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, so that his fierce anger will turn away from us. My sons, do not neglect your duties any longer. The Lord has chosen you to stand in his presence, to minister to him, and to lead the people in worship and present offerings to him." Then these Levites got right to work, and I've got a whole list of names there that I won't take the time to dig through. These men called together their fellow Levites, and they all purified themselves. Then they began to cleanse the temple of the Lord, just as the king had commanded. They were careful to follow all the Lord's instructions in their work. The priests went into the sanctuary of the temple of the Lord to cleanse it, and they took out to the temple courtyard all the defiled things they found. From there, the Levites carted it all out to the Kidron Valley, the Jerusalem city dump, in other words. They began the work in early spring and on the first day of the new year, and in 8 days they had reached the entry room of the Lord's temple. Then they purified the temple of the Lord itself, which took another 8 days, so the entire task was completed in 16 days. Then the Levites went to King Hezekiah and gave him this report. "We have cleansed the entire temple of the Lord, the altar of burnt offering with all its utensils, and the table of the bread of the presence with all its utensils. We have also recovered all the items discarded by King Ahaz when he was unfaithful and closed the temple. They are now in front of the altar of the Lord, purified and ready for use." Early the next morning, King Hezekiah gathered the city officials and went to the temple of the Lord. They brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, and 7 male lambs as a burnt offering, together with 7 male goats as a sin offering for the kingdom, for the temple, and for Judah. The king commanded the priests, who were descendants of Aaron, to sacrifice the animals on the altar of the Lord. So they killed the bulls, and the priests took the blood and sprinkled it on the altar. Next they killed the rams and sprinkled their blood on the altar. And finally they did the same with the male lambs. The male goats for the sin offering were then brought before the king and the assembly of the people, who laid their hands on them. and this is following the procedures issued at that very first tent tabernacle in the wilderness. The priests then killed the goats as a sin offering and sprinkled their blood on the altar to make atonement for the sins of all Israel. The king had specifically commanded that this burnt offering and sin offering should be made for all Israel. King Hezekiah then stationed the Levites at the temple of the Lord with cymbals, lyres, and harps. He obeyed all the commands that the Lord had given to King David through Gad, the king's seer, and the prophet Nathan. The Levites then took their positions around the temple with the instruments of David, and the priests took their positions with the trumpets. So now there's going to be music and singing. Then Hezekiah ordered that the burnt offering be placed on the altar. As the burnt offering was presented, songs of praise to the Lord were begun, accompanied by the trumpets and other instruments of David, the former king of Israel. The entire assembly worshipped Yahweh as the singers sang and the trumpets blew, until all the burnt offerings were finished. Then the king and everyone with him bowed down in worship. King Hezekiah and the officials ordered the Levites to praise the Lord with the psalms written by David and by Asaph the seer. When we get into the book of Psalms, we'll see all the times that some of them are attributed to Asaph. So they offered joyous praise and bowed down in worship. Then Hezekiah declared, "Now that you have consecrated yourselves to the Lord, bring your sacrifices and thanksgiving offerings to the temple of the Lord." So the people brought their sacrifices and thanksgiving offerings, and all whose hearts were willing brought burnt offerings too. The people brought to the Lord 70 bulls, 100 rams, and 200 male lambs for burnt offerings. They also brought 600 cattle and 3,000 sheep and goats as sacred offerings. Now, these sacred offerings would have been also food for the crowd, so they would have a big feast as well as everything else that's taking place. But there were too few priests to prepare all the burnt offerings, so their relatives, the Levites, helped them until the work was finished and more priests had been purified, for the Levites had been more conscientious about purifying themselves than the priests had been. There was an abundance of burnt offerings along with the usual liquid offerings and a great deal of fat from the many peace offerings. So the temple of the Lord was restored to service, and Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced because of what God had done for the people, for everything had been accomplished so quickly. And there was a footnote there, on the first day of the first month. The first day, this day in the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar occurred in March or early April, and they're saying 715 BCE. Now we get to the Passover. So this was in the spring. Passover was also in the spring of the year. King Hezekiah now sent word to all Israel and Judah, and he wrote letters of invitation to the people of Ephraim and Manasseh. He asked everyone to come to the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. The king, his officials, and all the community of Jerusalem decided to celebrate Passover a month later than usual. See, Passover normally would have been right at the beginning of the year, but the temple wasn't ready then, so they were unable to celebrate it, verse 3 it says, at the prescribed time because not enough priests could be purified by then, and the people had not yet assembled at Jerusalem. No, they were still getting things ready. This plan for keeping the Passover seemed right to the king and all the people. So they sent a proclamation throughout all Israel from Beersheba in the south to Dan in the north. So this included both the southern and northern kingdoms, inviting everyone to come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. The people had not been celebrating it in great numbers as required in the law. At the king's command, runners were sent throughout Israel and Judah. They carried letters that said, quote, "O people of Israel, return to Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel." B probably says something about Jacob. Yes, Israel's the name God gave Jacob. I should think we would need footnotes for that, but I guess they want to be sure. so that he will return to the few of us who have survived the conquest of the Assyrian kings. Do not be like your ancestors and relatives who abandoned Yahweh, the God of their ancestors, and became an object of derision, as you yourselves can see. Do not be stubborn as they were, but submit yourselves to Yahweh. Come to his temple, which he has set apart as holy forever. Worship the Lord your God, so that his fierce anger will turn away from you. Now, there is a transactional element in even what Hezekiah is saying here. That's the culture of the time. It's highly transactional. So even when their heart is fully dedicated to God, they may still have misunderstandings. And as I say that, let me point out here, we're not going to go around, how great we are, we know God the way they did. No, I'm not going to say that. We may have an understanding of some things that they misunderstood. But we may also have misunderstanding about things that we still have to overcome in knowing God. So we're not going to sit here and say we know everything there is to know about God. We might know a little bit more than they did, but that doesn't make us better than them. It just makes our knowledge a little better. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Yeah. So, anyway. For if you return to the Lord, your relatives and your children will be treated mercifully by their captors, and they will be able to return to this land. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful. If you return to him, he will not continue to turn his face from you. Well, I mean, any relationship takes both the commitment of both parties. If one party's not committed, the condition of party one doesn't matter. The condition of party two prevents the relationship. The runners went from town to town throughout Ephraim and Manasseh and as far as the territory of Zebulun, but most of the people just laughed at the runners and made fun of them. However, some people from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves and went to Jerusalem. At the same time, God's hand was on the people in the land of Judah, giving them all one heart to obey the orders of the king and his officials, who were following the word of the Lord. So a huge crowd assembled at Jerusalem in mid-spring. Now, footnotes, he's going to say the exact dates given in Hebrew, to celebrate the festival of unleavened bread, which was what followed the Passover. They set to work and removed the pagan altars from Jerusalem. They took away all the incense altars and threw them in the Kidron Valley. Again, Jerusalem city dome. On the 14th day of the second month, 1 month later than usual, the people slaughtered the Passover lamb. This shamed the priests and Levites, so they purified themselves and brought burnt offerings to the temple of the Lord. Then they took their places at the temple as prescribed in the law of Moses, the man of God. The Levites brought the sacrificial blood to the priests, who then sprinkled it on the altar. Since many of the people had not purified themselves, the Levites had to slaughter their Passover lamb for them, to set them apart for the Lord. Most of those who came from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun had not purified themselves, but King Hezekiah prayed for them, and they were allowed to eat the Passover meal anyway, even though this was contrary to the requirements of the law. For Hezekiah said, "May the Lord, who is good, pardon those who decide to follow the Lord, the God of their ancestors, even though they are not properly cleansed for the ceremony." And the Lord listened to Hezekiah's prayer and healed the people. And what we're seeing here is, yes, these rules were issued for a reason, and there was education in the rules. But ultimately, the rules don't matter. It's the condition of the heart and of the character that matters. And these few people from Israel who came down to celebrate this Passover, they hadn't had time. Purification took time. It was a very involved process, and they hadn't done it. They hadn't had time. They probably didn't know what it involved because in their country, the law of God was not particularly well understood and taught. The knowledge of how to do this wasn't there. But these people had chosen to follow the Creator. And Hezekiah said, let's not stop them over something in the rule book. They want to worship. Let's let them worship. And we'll ask God to forgive their breaking of the rules. And it says the Lord listened and healed. Which is why we come to God in prayer. We come to God in prayer so that we can be linked up to Him, so He can heal us. Because as humans, we're messed up. We're broken. We've developed all these faulty coping mechanisms because of the trouble in the world around us. God wants to fix us. And if we come to Him and let Him and trust Him, He will. The Lord listened to Hezekiah's prayer and healed the people. If we pray to God for healing, He wants to do it. All we have to do is trust and let Him. So the people of Israel who were present in Jerusalem joyously celebrated the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days. That's the 7 days after the Passover. The first and last of which were Sabbaths.
Hello?
Yes?
There is a law that shows that God will heal. It's the law of no, I don't know what it is, but it's by beholding we become changed.
Yeah, that's out of 2 Corinthians chapter 3.
Now think about it. You tend to act like the people that you admire.
I think you're talking about the law of worship.
Maybe.
You become like whatever it is you worship. So if you worship a human idol, the pop idol, you become like that person. And there may be both good and bad in that. Which is why it was so important that the people not worship Satan. Because if you worship Satan, then you become like Satan. If you worship the Creator, then you become like the Creator. And like you say, by beholding, we become changed. As we place the purity and lovingness of God's character before us, and as we dwell on that, then we can be changed into that same image progressively. The way Paul put it is from glory to glory. Anyway, our time is up, but I want to finish this chapter. The celebration continued for 7 days. Peace offerings were sacrificed, and the people gave thanks to the Lord, the God of their ancestors. The entire assembly then decided to continue the festival for another 7 days. So they celebrated joyfully for another week. King Hezekiah gave the people 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep and goats for offerings, and the officials donated 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep and goats. Meanwhile, many more priests purified themselves. The entire assembly of Judah rejoiced, including the priests, the Levites, all who came from the land of Israel, the foreigners who came to the festival, and all those who lived in Judah. There was great joy in the city, for Jerusalem had not seen a celebration like this one since the days of Solomon, King David's son. Then the priests and Levites stood and blessed the people, and God heard their prayer from His holy dwelling in heaven. Now, there'll be more to say about Hezekiah, because we aren't yet to the chapter that records the story of Sennacherib's threat on Jerusalem. So we'll probably get there next week. And as I said, we're a little bit over time tonight. I did want to finish this chapter, and here we are. So we will pick up at 2 Chronicles chapter 31, if I remember correctly, next week. And until then, we say goodbye and God bless.